All right, let's continue talking about Chapter 7. We've been talking about lists and links. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to move forward and how we use those a little bit better together to help us to create some menus. So we talked about using lists. So we have lists that we have just in the body of our page. We talked about creating lists that include links and doing some styling if they're inside of our navigation. But what if we want to make our navigation even more powerful? So we're going to begin taking a look at how we can utilize this system in order to make a better usable navigation experience for our user. So here I pulled up the example 16 navigation 2-tier. And before we get into the style sheets of this, let's go ahead and let's take a look at what we have going on inside of our HTML. So you notice that we have a navigation with ID nav menu. That's going to become pretty important that we understand that we have the nav. Unlike the main, the header, and the footer, you can have as many nav sections as you want, right? Main, header, and footer we only have appear once, but with this we can have as many navs. So if we want to make a vertical nav and a horizontal nav and have these different sections, we have the ability to do so. So as we begin looking at this and we start taking a look at the code that we have here, you notice inside that nav section is a unordered list. So we start off right away with this concept of an unordered list to begin this menu system. So our list items here, we have a list item for home, one for speakers, and then you notice inside the speakers section there's another unordered list, and that unordered list follows the same rules. You notice these are all going to different locations and things like that. You notice that some of them just have a pound sign in for the ahref. What that does is basically it creates it a link, but it doesn't go anywhere. It actually just, if you click on it, you stay on that page. It doesn't jump you to another location. So we have this nested unordered list. We come back out, we have another list item as part of our first list. Another list item inside there. Once again, we have another nested unordered list. Why do we have all these things put together? So when we actually come out and we take a look at this one, here are our individual lists, right? So those are the list items of the main UL, and then anything that comes in the drop down are the list items from the nested UL. So this is a very easy way to make a dynamic looking menu, right? There's not a lot of scripting. There's none of that stuff. We're just using style sheets to say we want this stuff to appear. So now that we know how the structure is set up in the HTML, let's go ahead and take a look at the style sheet that's allowing this to all take place. So I'll go into the 2-tier CSS. We'll just start at the top to make sure that we don't miss anything. But we notice we're just setting the margin and paddings to 0, the body, the H2. We get through all that stuff, right? That's just the natural beginning of our style sheet. So you notice now we get into our nav sections. So as we take a look at like what's going on in the nav section, the first thing is you notice that we just have set a bottom margin to the nav, right? That's the box that we have there. And then inside there we start getting into the menu items. So the first item, it has to be in that ID nav menu and be a UL. What's happening there? We take away the bullets. We're setting its position to relative, right? So then it knows where it's going to lay out inside the page. Then we go and we take a look at the LIs that are inside that UL, and we're floating them left. What's that going to do? It's now going to pull each LI up against each other, right? So LI after LI after LI, and it's going to go through and take a look that way. The next one is probably where people will get a little bit confused. So if you look, it has to be a UL that's in a UL that's in the nav menu, right? So that's our nested area. By default, we have its display set to none, which means it's not going to show up on the page. The position is absolute. The top is set at 100%. So that means it's going to be wherever it needs to be, and that's how it's going to position it. And so that positions it at the submenu. Then, once again, we take a look. We have the LIs. Their float is set to none. We no longer want them because we want them to go vertically, right? So we have to change that because they are inside the ULLI, right? And so technically they could pull some of that. They could come back and pull this information, right? Because technically they are a UL, they are an LI that's in a UL that's in a nav menu. But here we're saying like, okay, but if you're inside of another UL, the float's set to none. Then we have where on a hover, right, we want to make it block, and then the UL after, we want to have it just show like some empty quotes. And so that basically gives it that extra piece that goes into it. As we come down here then, right, there's more formatting that goes into this. So then we look at the ULs, we're changing some of their margin and padding. And that's the part that you kind of have to play around with. Sometimes you want a little bit more padding. Sometimes it makes it look goofy and everything else that comes into it. Then we say if it's an anchor tag, and this would go for the main UL and the inner UL because they follow the rules. You know, we want their width to be a certain size, text decoration, none, background color. Pretty much everything we see here we've done before except for maybe this display block. The display block is something that allows us to make them everything a box, right? So anchor tags technically aren't a box, they're an element. So what we're going to do is we're going to create them so they look like a block style item, and then we can move them around a little bit differently. Changing some background colors, the bold. Then we get into this last item, which you notice is a class. So if it's li.lastItem, that width is set a little bit differently. The current, so whatever page you're on, which you would manually have to set. And so later on I'll show you how we can do like includes. Through like jQuery we'll do like includes. So if you were doing an include, this technically wouldn't work because this is manually set on each page. So you would actually create this menu, copy and paste it onto every single page. Whatever page you're on, you would find that link set to current, so it would go to yellow. Then we have this anchor tag for the hover and for the focus. Excuse me. So we have this anchor tag for the menu and the focus that we can go through and we can put those things inside of. So if you notice, there's not a whole lot of new stuff inside this style sheet. It's just that the idea that we start looking at how is it that it's going through and putting everything back in. So definitely take a look at the style sheet. We'll come back to the HTML. We can now, because we understand some of the stuff there, we saw that we had that class current. That last item is adding some extra space. So if we go back and we take a look, right, we now notice that when we hover over here, it's changing its hover, so it's turning gray. When we hover here, by default, this was display none, but when we go here, it's now telling it to display it, right? So it's putting that inside, and that's the link that's below it. This doesn't have any, and then here we have some more, right? So the nice thing is, here's where our main element takes place. So if we go kind of take a look back at this style sheet here, we have to look at a couple things here. So we have the normalize and we have the navigation tier 2. If we look at this area, right, the nav takes place before the main. And so let's go look at this style sheet. Let's look at the normalize, see what we have in there. You notice the normalize is just setting up some base items, nothing that we really have to worry about. The 2-tier, you know, all that's really set up is inside of here. So we're getting there, and because the sub menu is setting them to none, that's no longer floating. If I was to come in here and let's say make that say float left, and then go back here and take a look, we're not really seeing a big difference, right? Except for on this one, because now what it's doing is it's floating everything left until it runs out of room and it goes back down here. But why did it only do it to that one? So that's where it has to be a nav menu, UL, UL, LI, right? So we have the UL, UL, LI. It's happening there. It should have affected these ones as well, but it's not, which is really odd because it should have affected basically every one of our objects there. Let's see. I think because this is the last item, that's why it's kind of changing. But so that's why we have to be careful. So when I go look at this style sheet again, so we changed that one to be a float left. And so it's causing us some like different issues. That's where, if you were to leave this out completely, right? Let's say we take this out and you forget to do. The reason why I want to show you that is because if you forgot to put in that float none, does it affect our turnout, right? So we'll go take a look, we'll launch. And so by forgetting that, right, it's really affecting our world. So the other part that I want to show you on that is, let's go back here. And this is where we had that float none. What if we did clear left? So let's say, you know, you're not really understanding the floats and the clears, and you end up doing a clear instead of float none. You're getting the same result then, right? So sometimes it works to do it one method. Sometimes you have to change it to make it work correctly all the time. So if you notice, we're setting the width on here. The width is being controlled by the width of the body. We can control the width of each individual item inside there as well. So let's take a look at a 3-tier. So here is an example of a 3-tier menu, which means there's 2 sub-menus. So we get into the same situation. The setup's the same. Here's the UL that starts our main. Then we have a UL inside of there, which does our sub-menu, which is where we were at before. And then you notice inside there, there's another UL for yet another sub-menu. So when we go and we take a look at this one, we notice when we go to speakers and we go to Scott Sampson, we have another layer. You could run this as deep as you want, right? I'm not saying that you should have a 6-tier menu, but you could run it however you want to start building it. So let's take a look at that style sheet. It's not going to be too different, right? Except for you're going to have that other layer inside of it. So we have the UL, right? That's the same. That's the same. That's the same. That's the same, right? But now we're going one more deep, right? So now we're saying UL, UL, LI, UL. And all we're really doing there is changing the position to be 100% on the left, which is what's going to push it to the other side. When we get to the last item, we're putting it back. And then we just have some of the other things set up for the hovers and some of those other objects. So if you really look at it, about 98% of it's the same. The only part that's really different is this section right here, because this takes it and shoots it out to the left. This puts it back behind where it was. So you have a good example of some menu systems inside there that you can take a look at, play around with it, play around with, one of the things is what would happen if I didn't have this float left. Let's say I say float none, and I go back and I launch it. Right now it's a vertical menu, and then now you notice that this is popping down below, right? Because we told it to. What if we go in and we change that style sheet a little bit? So instead of it being top 100%, what if we said left 100%? So we pop in here, we relaunch it. Now I hit speakers and look where it's at. It's way over there, right? Because it's like it's kind of confused on where it's supposed to be located. So all of them are popping up over there. So we would have to go in and maybe instead of 100%, right? Maybe this would be, let's try 0%, right? Here's where just kind of playing around with some values and seeing what happens can make a difference. So now it's right below it again, right? That's not what we want. We could, in theory, we know how wide, right? We know how wide those are. Somewhere it said how wide they were. These don't have to be in percentages. These could be left 100 and, let's say I say 150 pixels, right? I don't remember how wide that was. So I come back in, I launch it. Now you notice when I go here, oh, I'm getting a little bit closer. I'm going to come in and maybe I want this to be 175 pixels. But if you also notice, I probably need to bring the top I might need to bring the top up a little bit, right? So I'm going to have to go in negative pixels. So what I want to just show you is how we can take this, and you might have to do some tweaking. Well, now that negative 25 was too high because it's going up from here, right? But I'm a little bit closer. What if we did this at 180? And now what if we said this at 0 pixels, right? And what I'm showing you here is sometimes, depending on how you set up your menu, may take a little while. So now 0 pixels gets me here, right? And 180, I'm a little far out, but I'm not bad. I could also do some relative positioning here. I could change a few things in that manner. But trying to find this piece, right? So we know that we have to go down, and this is where if you set the height of each LI will make your life a little bit easier, because then you could get it a lot more precise. So now, 10 pixels doesn't come down very far, but I'm getting a little bit closer. Why am I showing you this? Because if we look at this one, that's perfect, right? Like it lined up identical because the way it's set up. Why is it set up that way? Because if we go and we look, that inner one has an absolute of left and a top of 0. Well, that should technically work here then, right? We should be able to say 100%, but when we did that before, it really jumped us over. So let's see if we get a little bit closer now, right? We're we're still like way over. So that one is not cooperating the way we want it to, whereas that one is, right? So there's some different things that we'd have to change in other locations. The reason why I'm showing you this is because just by changing this main one from being a float, right, it was a float left, by changing that, now we go to a vertical navigation, and this is what allows you to easily make some good navigation. Part of what I was showing you with just putting in different values is sometimes with positioning and floats and things like that, you really do have to play around with it, right? You have to, until you get like a lot better, it's really hard just to guess like, oh, this is this, and put this inside here. So you have a couple really good examples here to play around with, making some different menus, doing some different things with that, which I think will help you to understand, you know, kind of what's going on in the grand scheme of things. You know, by setting widths and heights makes your life a lot easier, and so those are some of the things. So that kind of wraps up a good majority of Chapter 7. I'm going to make another video here, and or I might make another video with a couple more examples, but for right now, I think with this file that's in the content section, this Chapter 7 file, you know, and the examples that are there, it should really help you understand how to do lists, links, and then also menus, which in your assignments, it's going to go into that same situation where you're going to end up creating some of these same things. So good luck with the assignments, and that wraps up Chapter 7.